doesn't make your brother feel bad about his grades. This scenario continued into adulthood, with Jason struggling to pass his classes and everyone saying, "At least you're doing your best, sweetie, not everyone is cut out for academics." The bigger the stakes, the worse it got, if anything. Jason dropped out of community college after one semester because it was too stressful. My parents paid his rent for a gap year, that ended up being 5 years of him finding himself. I worked 2 part-time jobs to pay for state college, one at a coffee shop in the mornings and another at a table waiting at night. I still recall the evening I moved away when I was 18. I was able to rent a small studio apartment with a roommate because of the money I saved from my part-time work. My dad said, "Well, you'll need to start paying rent if you're staying here anyway," when I told him I was leaving home, but they never asked Jason for $1 when he was still living at home at the age of 25. Because job hunting was emotionally draining for him, they even granted him an allowance. They never once offered to cover my living expenses or college tuition, not that I expected them to. But it still hurt to see them go above and beyond for Jason while I was on my own. I worked several jobs, took out student debts, and ate more dinners of ramen noodles than I would want to recall. Jason, meanwhile, continued to live with them until he was in his mid-20s, jumping from one failing job to another while always coming up with an explanation that it wasn't his fault. He would say things like, "The manager had it out for me," or, "The company's toxic culture wasn't a good fit for my personality." He never acknowledged his own responsibilities and always pointed the finger at something outside of himself. And by covering up his filth and offering excuses, our parents encouraged this conduct at every opportunity. I worked 2 jobs while attending college, graduated with honors, and got an entry-level job at a software business. I worked my way up from there, putting in a lot of overtime and seizing any chance to get more education and certification. My parents never offered to help, and I never asked for it either. However, they had no trouble approaching me for financial assistance whenever Jason needed a little help to get back on his feet. Now fast forward to last week. It was remarkable in and of itself that my mother called. You must realize that my mom doesn't call to talk. She never calls to say hello, check in, or inquire about my life. She calls when she's in need of things. I'm referring to the type of call that begins with excessively pleasant small talk, as if they're attempting to win you over before revealing the true reason for the call. That's precisely what took place last week. "How's work? Are you still at that tech company? Have you been eating well?" she asked at the beginning, which was so unusual that I knew something was up. My mother doesn't give a damn about my diet. The only thing she knows about my job is that I do something with computers. She couldn't even recall the name of my firm when we last spoke, which was during Thanksgiving 3 months earlier, even though I had been employed there for the previous 5 years. She seemed to be trying too hard to sound casual, and the entire conversation felt forced. She inquired about my boyfriend. I've been single since my engagement ended last year, another narrative in which Jason played a not-so-insignificant role, and apartment. I've owned a house for 2 years. Even my cat, to which I have never given birth due to an allergy. Every question reminded me of how little she truly knows about my life and felt like a tiny paper cut. Jason was in trouble once more when she struck me with it. I wasn't shocked. Jason seems to get into problems all the time. However, I didn't anticipate this. He had apparently accrued $40,000 in debt, not the kind of debt that can be dismissed as young folly, such as credit card debt or student loan debt. No, he had borrowed from some very dubious individuals, and they were now sincerely demanding their money back. My mother's voice broke as if she were going to cry, which I'm sure she believed would get me to give in. It has worked numerous times. She wasted no time in heaping on the guilt. "You've done so well for yourself. You've always been the strong one. Jason's not like you. He needs your help. He's sensitive. You know how he gets when he's under pressure." As I sat in my home office, trying to take in what she had just said, I looked out the window at the neighborhood that I had worked so hard to afford. $40,000. How could anyone possibly accumulate that much debt? My mom dismissed it like she was swatting away a bothersome fly when I asked her how it happened, half anticipating some ludicrous explanation about a botched business endeavor or a scam he had fallen for. She said, "That doesn't matter right now," with the same contemptuous tone that always made my stomach turn. "What matters is that he's your brother. Family helps family. We've always taught you that family comes first." For years, they have used that line, "family helps family," as an excuse. When they asked me to lend Jason money for his revolutionary cryptocurrency investment, which he lost all of in 2 weeks, that's what they stated. They said that after his girlfriend ejected him, he took my credit card information. They wanted me to let him stay at my house. Every time they required me to cover for Jason, fix anything for him, or clean up a mess he had made, they said that. And each time, I overcame my annoyance and followed their instructions. I did not want to be the villain. Because deep down, there was still that little girl who longed for her parents' approval, thinking that perhaps this time they would recognize my assistance, my sacrifice, and my continual saving of their beloved boy. But $40,000? It wasn't merely a favor or a loan. It was a down payment for a home. That was a year of arduous labor. That served as my safety net, emergency reserve, and security for the future. This time, I couldn't do it. I told her no for the first time in my life, right up. I apologized, but I was powerless to save Jason from the disaster he had made. The tone of the conversation suddenly changed. In roughly 2 seconds, my mother moved from being pathetic to being enraged. Had it not been so horrifying, the metamorphosis would have been nearly remarkable. The mother's gentle, worried voice had vanished, to be replaced by an icy, piercing voice. She began to scream. "You're being selfish?" Her voice getting louder as she spoke. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? You're abandoning your family when they need you most." The nuclear option was even mentioned by her. "Do you want his blood on your hands? He borrowed from some nasty folks. What would happen if he did?" The manipulation was so obvious that it was quite comical, nearly. However, her attempt to hold me accountable for Jason's bad decisions, again, was not amusing. As though his choices, errors, and total lack of accountability were somehow my fault. Then I ended the call. I was no longer able to listen to it. My chest felt constricted, as if someone were sitting on it, and my hands were shaking so much that I could hardly press the end call button. However, behind the familiar burden of familial expectations, the shame, and the fear, there was comfort. I was relieved that I had maintained my position for once. I've put in too much effort to be brought down by the poor decisions of others. I've devoted years to developing my job, becoming self-sufficient, and establishing a life apart from serving as Jason's safety net. I simply couldn't bear the idea of discarding all of that. Of maybe jeopardizing my own financial stability to allow his recklessness to continue. However, the problem with growing up in a dysfunctional home is that guilt creeps in almost instantly, even if you know you're making the right decision and are positive you're acting in your own best interests. Even though I know I'm not the bad guy, my family has a way of changing the facts, making me doubt my own judgment and making me feel that way. And it was the same this time. I can't get rid of the thought that perhaps I made the wrong choice, even though I said no and know it was the right one. At the moment, confronting my family seemed like the correct thing to do, but now I'm left wondering if I've made things worse. But what if they're correct? Could I be being self-centered? What if Jason does suffer as a result of my refusal to assist? The logical side of my brain understands that I have no responsibility for my brother's decisions or the results of those decisions. However, a part of me that is still that young child, begging for her parents' approval, continues asking herself, what if? To be honest, I have no idea what will happen next. That call was only the beginning. I was totally unprepared for what transpired next. I suspect that this is not the end. Particularly with Jason, my parents have never been good at taking no for an answer. I'm trying to remain strong, though. I'm trying to keep in mind that I have the right to defend my future and myself. As this situation develops, I suspect I'll require additional guidance. I'll provide an update shortly. First update. First of all, I want to thank everyone who left encouraging comments on my previous post. To be honest, I didn't anticipate such a strong reaction. The previous week has seen a sharp increase in tension, and not in a positive way. Do you recall that I sensed this wasn't the end? Yes, I was correct. As soon as I hung up on my mom, the harassment campaign began. Initially, it was just a flurry of text messages. The typical guilt-tripping fare. Then, however, things became considerably more sinister. My bank notified me of the unusual behavior last Tuesday. Someone had tried to use what seemed to be stolen personal information to get into my account. I received a direct call from the bank's fraud department. They claimed that a huge transfer attempt using my credentials had been detected by their security system due to the suspicious IP address. The fraud investigator told me that the person who attempted to access my account had my mother's maiden name, my social security number, and even the name of my first pet, all of which are standard security questions. Jason would be the only one with access to all that information. Upon realizing that my own brother would attempt to steal from me, I promptly updated all of my security questions and passwords. Very difficult. Money was no longer the only factor in this. This was a completely new kind of betrayal. This is where it becomes even more bizarre though. One of the few relatives with whom I truly get along, my Aunt Catherine, gave me a call yesterday. It seems that my parents have been giving a totally different account of what happened to everyone in the family.